MJ,
I'm SpiderMan.
No, of course I'm not.
I mean, it's kind of obvious.
You're right, we may not be ready, but this is my responsibility.
Saving the world requires sacrifice. Sometimes people die.
One of the ways that economists kind of test their theory is to play games. And one of the cool games that economists have tried over the years is on little kids. So let's say you have two little sisters, and maybe one's 4 and one's 6, or one's 5 and one's 7. Just little kids. Okay? Go up to the younger one of the two and say to younger one of the two, here's your choice. You get a choice. Either you can pick that I'll give you $4 and I'll give your sister $4, or I'll give you $5, but if I give you 5, I'm going to give your sister 6. What do you choose? Well, 99 out of 100 little kids will pick 4 and 4. That costs them $1. But in their mind, it's more fair. Okay? Now, an economist would say what the kid should do is turn to her sister and go, hey, give me 50 cents. Because if Big Sis gives her 50 cents, and then they pick 5 and 6, they're both going to end up with $5.50, and that's fair too. But that's usually not what they think. They take the 4 and the 4. Human beings have this innate idea that fairness matters, and it's universal across the planet Earth. Okay? So we economists argue that sometimes we get involved, for example, in tariff wars that make both countries worse off, but we'd rather be even and worse than better and not. These fairness games make a really strong point to us that people think the world should somehow be fundamentally fair. And again, this is something we appear to be born with, and it's a universal trait across the planet Earth. So we can ask questions, and people do ask these questions all the time. The person who starts a business should make more than, and is taking the risk, should make more than the person who works for them, right? The person who builds the hotel and puts $2 billion in should make more money than the person who's checking people in at the front desk. But should it be 20 times more? 200 times more? 2,000 times more? In most of the world, and in the United States back in the 50s and 60s, 20 times, executives in companies made 20 times what the average worker did. In most of the world today, that's still true, 20, 30, maybe 40 times. In the United States, nowadays, it's more like 200 times. And there are companies when it's 2,000 or 3,000 times as much that the senior executives make. Okay? It used to be that university presidents didn't make all that much more. Maybe they made 2 or 3 times what the highest paid professors did. Now university presidents are making millions, while professors are still making not millions. What is fair? And economists don't really like to get into this discussion of what is fair. What we know is that people expect things to be fair, and they work better when they think whatever they're doing or whatever game they're playing is fair. But we really don't have that economic theory of how to create fair. Think about it. If you start a business and take a ton of risk and put a whole bunch of money in, and you're going to get paid the same as your workers, why would you do it? At the same time, how much more do you really need to make? Do you really need to make 30 or 40? Does the guy who runs the NFL need to make $100 or $200 million a year? Right? The commissioner. Does he? So, big questions for which we don't really have necessarily big answers. There are some things that might get in the way of all of this working. We're going to talk about a few of them now, and then more as the semester goes along. Just because there are reasons why the system might not be perfect Doesn't mean you need a new system necessarily. You still have to judge this against all the alternatives. Don't forget Winston Churchill, right? Former Prime Minister of England, who said, democracy is the worst system you can think of until you compare it to the alternatives. So, thing number one, globalization. Globalization does not simply mean trade in the sense that, we buy wool from England and they buy spam from us. That's not really globalization. Globalization means that the economies of two countries become hooked together. So globalization means that the parts from the cars are made in China and Mexico, and the cars are made in the United States. We cannot build cars without China and Mexico because we need the parts. They can't build cars without us because they make the parts, but they don't have the factories. The economies of the countries are linked together. That's globalization. I put a banana up here because we live in a world where all of the banana plantations in Costa Rica, and there's lots of bananas that are grown in Costa Rica, are owned by American companies, by U.S. companies. So when profits are earned off of bananas in Costa Rica, those profits might end up in the United States, not in Costa Rica. Because of globalization, we have these new interrelationships across the planet Earth. What constitutes fair in those situations? China and the United States linked together in car production. What is a fair relationship between those two countries? With the bananas, there are people who argue that we're exploiting Costa Rica. We're taking advantage of them, and the money that's made off of Costa Rican bananas should stay in Costa Rica. There are other people that say, without the money that came from the United States to equip those plantations and get that whole industry going, there would be no jobs for banana people in Costa Rica, and there'd be no banana profits in Costa Rica. So what constitutes fair? The U.S. put money in, U.S. companies put money in, because of that profits are being made and jobs exist. Does that mean we can't take money out? Does that mean we should leave some? What's fair? And we kind of, again, don't have an economic answer to that. We as economists can analyze what's gone on, but we can't necessarily say this is right and this is wrong. That's not our job. Another potential problem here is the information age has created monopolies. We don't have 100 different search engines. We don't have 100 different operating systems to choose from. We have a few dominant players. We have Microsoft and Apple. We have Google, right? Throughout the information technology business, there isn't really competition. And in fact, you can argue that you don't want there to be. If you have 50 people that you want to keep in touch with, and all 50 of them are on different social media places, your life is going to be miserable. It's good for you that there's a couple places, right? So people are on Instagram, or they're on TikTok, or they're on whatever the hot thing of the moment is, but you don't have to go to 6 places to find out what all your friends are doing. Simple. Maybe it's better that most people are either Windows or Mac people, because you can figure everything out by knowing 2 computers. You don't have to know 8 or 10 or 12 different kinds of computers. You only have to know 2. So there may be advantages in this having monopolies all over the place in information technology, but we know that invisible hand, that let's do everything good for the consumer, depends on there being competition. Now we have this inherent conflict between the advantages of these systems as being a monopoly and the disadvantages of them being monopolies. Another thing that gets in the way, or might get in the way, is the problem of climate change. And it's not just climate change, it's a whole environmental issue. And the problem with environmental issues, as we'll see, is that one person who gets the benefits of something might be able to move the cost to someplace else. And we'll talk about this quite a bit, actually. But the United States, if we make a deal to lower our carbon emissions, one way to do that, which is in our self-interest, is to simply move that factory or move that operation, whatever it is, mining, whatever, out of the United States. So if we take our polluting factories and move them to Mexico, the United States lowers its carbon footprint at the expense of Mexico, but the whole world's carbon footprint doesn't change. So there might be, in this world of climate change and concerns about which country contributes the most, and it's the United States and Western Europe and Russia and China and Japan and the richest countries in many ways that are producing the most pollution, the countries with the biggest GDPs. And yet they have ways maybe of getting around creating those problems or being responsible for some of those problems or dealing with those problems. Okay? And again, something we'll talk about in depth as we go through the semester. We've had a lot of problems in recent years with this whole Wall Street versus Main Street thing, and you need to take the macro part of economics to really spend some time talking about all that. But do we have a country where everyone has equal access to financial markets, where the people who are buying stocks and bonds, or you who are trying to put money away for retirement, are sure that you can trust what's going on in the financial markets, are sure you know enough to be in those financial markets? Do the people who are on Wall Street, and what we saw in 2007, 8, 9 is that they didn't take responsibility. They were selling financial products that were questionable, and they were insuring themselves against the risk, but they weren't telling the investors that this risk existed. And lots of people lost their jobs and lots of money. And the folks on Wall Street, they went from making $30 million a year to making $5 million a year, and they're upset. But that's a whole different world than most of us live in. And the side to that, which is again something else we'll talk about in this class, is, and if you take macro, you really talk about whose job is it to protect us? Is it somebody's job to protect us? If we're investing in the stock market, but we can't possibly understand the stock market, and we have to trust the folks on Wall Street to make sure that that game is fair, do we need to do something? Does the government need to do something? How do we know that this game is actually fair for us? Okay, good question. We mentioned earlier that our economic system is referred to as capitalism. It's actually mixed capitalism because there is no country that's just one economic system. All countries share different economic systems. We use them in different ways and mingle them together. But our fundamental economic system here in the United States is this system called capitalism. Technically, capitalism was actually named by Karl Marx, who was an opponent of it. And obviously, he thought the key to our economic system was how capital plays in our system. Capitalist economic system, remember those questions about how, for whom, right? What, how, for whom? In a capitalist system, markets are supposed to answer that question, free markets, the buyers and sellers, the negotiation and exchange. In a capitalist system, those folks who are in that market are free to pursue their own self-interest. They have freedom, and they get to choose how they think the best outcomes are obtained. Okay, with this underlying from Adam Smith idea that our best private choices, our best self-interest choices will turn out to be the best societal choices. And then the other fundamental part here is that the capital, the machines, the factories, are privately owned. In capitalism, people, human beings, own factories, machines, and so on. Right? That private ownership, that freedom, that markets, most economists believe that that provides these great incentives that cause our economy to be innovative and dynamic and all those good things. Okay? Not everybody believes that, obviously, and we'll get to that, but free choice, individual choice, ownership. You can invent something and come up with an idea. You can own it. You can use it to your own best self-interest, and if other people like it, society benefits, you benefit, we all come out positively from this. Again, it's the invisible hand. It's free markets. There has to be competition in the world. There has to be freedom of choice in the world. That is how capitalism is supposed to work. And if those things are present, it should work really pretty well. Kind of the opposite of capitalism, at least in the theoretical sense, is what's called socialism. There are sort of two versions of this. There's what's called utopian socialism, and there's this guy, Robert Owen, there, who's an example of that. He set up little socialist societies around factories that he owned and thought that you could create a utopia. Karl Marx, whose caricature is there, we classify him as scientific socialism. Essentially, these folks are going to argue that the way capitalism is set up, there's an uneven relationship between the owners of capital and the workers, and that the owners of the capital have power and the workers don't. And what that means over time is that the workers become an appendage of the machine. They're going to do work that has no value, has no meaning to them. They're not craftsmen. They're appendages of the machine. There's no work to take pride in, to enjoy doing. They're appendages of the machine. And as time goes on, the capital owners are going to get richer and richer, and the workers are going to get poorer and poorer. The system is going to self-destruct eventually because of these divisions. And what should replace it is a world where the workers essentially are dominant, where the government is using scientific principles. That's why this scientific socialism idea comes in. The government uses scientific principles, empowers the workers, creates a more idyllic society. And every university pretty much in the world offers a whole course if you want to, read Marx and talk about all this and go that way. The two countries that really tried to do this, the Soviet Union, which was Russia, and most of Eastern Europe together as sort of a country, and then China, when it was communist, they were highly inefficient. This idea that the government can handle all this, can apply scientific principles, that government workers can do their business for the good of society, and that workers can do their business for the good of society is a problem. In fact, Karl Marx said, he agreed with a lot of what Adam Smith, his theory is based on a lot of Adam Smith's work, basically, and he said that for communism to work, there has to be a fundamental change in human nature, that people wouldn't put society ahead of themselves, and you've got to have, in socialism to work, society, right, the government has to put the interests of society above the interests of itself. Congressmen and senators would have to put the interests of society above their own personal interests. Let's just say that there's issues with socialism that would have to be addressed if you wanted to head that way. And over time, over the last 30, 40 years, the countries that were heavily socialism for the most part have abandoned that and became more capitalist, Russia and China. Two good examples. Other countries, European countries, have adopted more socialism since the end of World War II. And so where the world is and how the world's dealing with this is a a good topic for an Econ 102 class, a Principles of Micro class. And some of these issues will come up over and over again during the course of our class.